Afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, sir.
My name is Ni Oladero, a member of the choir.
All right.
Now, sir, first of all, can we meet you, sir?
I'm sure we've met before. But my name is Akinpelu Johnson, and by God's grace, or by divine permission, the Bishop of the Diocese of Lagos, Mainland, and with the cathedral being here at the Cathedral of St. Jude, Butebeta.
Thank you, sir. As we all know, definitely, that you were once a chorister. Based on your experience at that time, sir, what can you really say is the difference between the choir then and the one we have now? In terms of maybe there was any incentives from any angle, or how can you weigh the commitment?
Your question is very, very wide. But the premise on which you have asked the question, at least vis-a-vis myself, let me just make a slight correction. I would still like to consider myself as a member of the choir. And by when I say the choir, of course, I grew up in the Cathedral Church of Christ, Marina, Lagos. And we do have that singular honor, at least in my generation when I was a chorister there, as when I was a choir boy there, as being the first amongst equals by way of standard and even how people looked at us by virtue of the fact that it is the Cathedral Church of Christ, and that's the first cathedral in the Church of Nigeria. It used to be the national church. And of course, like I said, it's I still consider myself as a member of the choir. Occasionally, when I go for services there, occasionally I might join the choir to sing. If, for instance, at a funeral service they are having song tributes, and after that, maybe they are having. I think the last time I participated was at a funeral service when they were having the. At the end of the service, they had Worthy is the Lamb and the 99 Amens by Handel. So I'm still looked at as a member of the choir. So now you're asking me to say what's the difference now between the choir then and now. And by that, I want to understand that I understand that you're not necessarily asking me about the cathedral choir. I'm making a comparison with St. Jude's choir, because I can't make that comparison in as much as I was never a member of St. Jude's choir. In the cathedral choir, yes, growing up then, as children, Nigeria was better. And as children, there was joy in service. And I suppose children now who are in the choir, wherever they may be, might find that to be true. But those of us, adults now, will look back and seem to talk about the good old days. That's the usual thing, the good old days. The cathedral choir was beautiful to be a part of. I believe I joined at 6 rather than 7. The age for joining was 7. I joined at 6. Maybe because my father was a provost, and then maybe also because his cousin was the master of the music, Mr. C.O. Phillips. We are related. And I want to also believe that beyond that, by God's grace, I did have a good treble voice, and Mr. Phillips noticed that. Incidentally, my grandmother used to tell me before she passed in 1991, I believe, that when I was young and I was brought to the house here in Ibadan Street. Our family house is number 23 Ibadan Street, right opposite the church, the cathedral, so to speak. She used to say that when I would come back from school, I just love to sing. And then people will gather around the windows of the house. If you know the house there, people will gather around, and who is this boy singing? And in school, I attended St. Mary's private school. I used to sing at assemblies and lead the singing national anthem, sing at the assembly, whether it was national anthem or the hymns that we're singing, Roman Catholic school, Ave Maria, Gratia Pena, Dominus Tecum, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Gratia. I used to do all those things. So for me, my experience of growing up in the choir was one of having another family, so to speak. And it's the same for all the boys in those days. When we meet, old choristers, these are one of the things we used to talk about. The fact that people like the late Mr. C.O. Phillips, the organist master of the music, Mr. Sojili Raju, Mr. Yinka Shiwandi, they were like our parents. Those who lived outside, in Suliri and all, came to church with them. They would bring them to church and take them back home. And one of the most important things was that all of us were members of the cathedral. Our fathers, there was a tradition that our fathers had passed through. In fact, there's a particular family that 4 generations have served in that cathedral choir. So all of them had passed through, so they knew what was expected, they'd done it, and the kind of encouragement, first of all, to attend practices. Lagos was not as bad as it is traffic-wise now. But having said that, with hindsight, yes, there were days of traffic and all that. But that commitment was there. And the men in the choir would go out of their way to make sure that we were, those coming from Suliri or wherever they were coming from, would get to choir practice and we'll go back. And in those days, the boys would start practice at 6 on Tuesdays and would finish at 7. The men will come at 7 and we finish at 8. On Thursdays, the boys would start at 6 and the men would join at 6:30. But one of the great traditions of the cathedral choir in those days was that before choir practice, there was always football. We always played football, and that was one thing that brought in the harmony and the friendship. There was football, there was deck and can. It was religious. But when you talk to other choristers, those in their 70s now, they will tell you the same thing, that there was football. It was the advent of computer that scattered everything. Now boys don't play football, they don't do anything, they just come and go. There was nothing that... And before the choir festivals, when we go for choir picnics hosted by a patron of the choir or something like that, I remember there was a home, we used to go to the home of the late Mr. Tunji Hafner, engineer Tunji Hafner. He had a swimming pool. So one of the rituals was, a bus will come, take the choir boys in the morning, and we'll have our breakfast there. Then we'll have the opportunity of swimming under great supervision and all that. And then we'll play the traditional deck versus can, the decano and the cantoris, deck versus can football. And those men I mentioned, Mr. C.O. Phillips, Mr. Lydia Du, Mr. Shiwande, would be there to witness it. So it was a family. It was a different, and I do remember that, yes, there were times when I wasn't doing too well at school, and my father banished me from playing football, and I said to him, without football, I can't study. So I decided that, okay, if I have to study, then I will give something up for something, and I would make sure that during choir practice, that is when I'll carry my books and say that I want to study. And he will come and say, aren't you going to choir practice? I have to do my homework. So it went on like that for the first week, second week. Then Mr. Phillips saw me and said, well, you haven't come to choir practice for... And the rules were simple. No practice, no rubbing. So it was okay. I wanted to prove a point. So he said, well, what's going on? Why aren't you coming? I said, well, you have to ask Daddy about that, why I'm not coming. But I'm doing my homework. Schoolwork was, And he had to have a talk with my father. One evening, he came after choir practice that, Shokwe, I don't know how you are going to do it, but you must return to the choir stores. So the three of us had a negotiation that, okay, I'll be allowed to play my football, because the football was one that opened, when you get to choir stores, the voice exercise. We did that in the football field. It's a goal. It's beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. If I look back and I compare with what happens now, not necessarily in the cathedral choir in Lagos or this place, all of that seems to have gone. It's died a natural death. There's no bonding between the boys, you know. And after choir practice on Tuesday, it was thief and police that we used to play until the men finished, because the men were the ones going to take the boys back home. So we also had the opportunity of playing at night until they finished. At Christmas, at the end of the year, there were bonuses paid to the choir boys and to the men based on attendance. And one of the things that I remember clearly, because I joined so early, was that at that first one that I'd witnessed, when the attendance register was read and people were paid bonuses based on their attendance, Mr. C.O. Phillipson said, well, Pelu has joined, but I hadn't been even fully admitted to the choir. And he said, I have to give Pelu something. And he called me forward and he gave me money. I don't know how much it was, of course, whether it was shillings or naira in those days. But I do remember that the next morning I went to the old CSS building. That is where the Tantalizer sits today. There was a shop there. And I went upstairs and I went to buy toy cars. This is not the Colgate toy cars and stuff like that. So I do remember those things that they're very important. And of course, my first solo was even before I was fully admitted into the choir. He just said to me while choir practice for Christmas carols, he said, "Well, go and stand at the west door. Sing once in Royal David City. Sing that first stanza." And Mr. Shwande, give him the note. And I sang it. That's how I just started singing solos in the choir. So for me, it was very special. And I'm sure for a lot of boys who were in the choir at that time. Incidentally, the Chancellor of the Diocese, Justice Yinka Faji, were contemporaries in the choir. He was on deck side, I was on can side. Although I started off in deck, but then moved to can side. And it was a great rivalry, competition, when you're in the choir stalls, between the deck and the can side. And before I got to the leadership role in the choir, it was when the period of General Gowon as head of state. And at Christmas, he would come, and after the services, after Christmas Day service, he will follow us to the vestry. We will take pictures outside the cathedral. I do remember by the Lagoon 1973, took pictures outside of the cathedral. He will follow us to the vestry. He will follow us to the vestry, greet all the choir boys, greet all the choir men, and that was it. Now, discipline was also a beautiful thing. There was discipline. I do remember, again, Christmas Day, General Gowon was in church, and I just wanted to play the fool, and I said, between the Matins and the Holy Communion, and I said I wanted to go to the restroom. And Mr. Alidadu looked at me. He says, "Well, are you sure you want to really go to the toilet?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "If you go, you're not coming back." So I had to be sure what I wanted to say. Really, I suppose I should have stayed. I could have stayed. You know, then he said to me, "You know that you're going to miss the photographs with the head of state?" Well, because I already committed myself that time, he said, "Well, if you go, don't come back." So he left it to me. So I just went, took off my robes, I went back home. So I missed the opportunities that Sunday to meet with General Gowon and his wife, Victoria Gowon. So preparing for carol services guaranteed you that when you sang solos, members of the congregation will come in and give you money to say, "Well done." Then you were just even preparing for choir festivals. When we were preparing for choir festivals, the choir wives will come, decorate the church. They will spend the day preparing the church. In the evening, the provost will come, then, of course, then my father, and he will lead us in a rededication service. It's completely different now. Now, you're talking now about the incentives. For us, the incentives were the way we were treated by the members of the congregation and maybe by the cathedral. Good thing my father was a chorister in the cathedral. I don't know whether that informed Now, really, maybe the bonuses that we received, I don't know where they came from. Was it from the church or from some kind of thing that was done? But those things that were just given at the end of the year was based on attendance, percentages. So it's part of the discipline. And those were the incentives. When we go for choir festivals, choir picnics, maybe twice a year, once in January and then before the choir festival. There'll be music competitions, especially when you go to the homes where they have pianos. And they'll have for the boys, music competition. First prize can be a bicycle. At least I did get a bicycle once for winning first prize once. It was a folding bicycle. I'm talking about in the 70s. So we loved singing. We loved it. There was discipline. There was everything. And from the point of view that we were all appreciated as choir boys growing up, I don't think there was nothing like that. Then, of course, when you talk about scholarships, government scholarships, no. Church and state were different. There was nothing like government scholarships. What concerns the government with the church? But for instance, the cathedral choir itself, the treble line, it was an action of government that decimated it. When government took over schools in 1979 or so like that, so a lot of parents started withdrawing their children. So the growing in, from probationary stage, and it was a gradual process. For as long as the choir had been, the boys would go, and just as boys were going to alto, tenor, or going out to school or university doing other things, then the next stage, but you find that by 1979, 1980, the treble line just like that. It took a long time for it to recover. It's argued that it hasn't still recovered. But then what we enjoyed was that all of us were children of members of the cathedral choir, of the cathedral at that point in time. No government scholarships. We just loved doing it. And we were encouraged in doing it. It was give and take. Now, I don't know, because I don't know what really happens here. But when I look at it and I see it, and I won't want to put on record my thoughts about what I see now. But I have to just look back and say the good old days. As provost of the Cathedral Church of Christ, Lagos now, that was a different thing. What did I see at that point in time? I saw that the Cathedral Choir itself had changed. It wasn't what it was when we were younger. Standards had fallen. But people tried to do some things. And 2 families instituted scholarships. That was during my time as provost. 2 families instituted scholarships. One was Dr. Olumide Phillips, his school, Darwin College. At the height of the scholarship that he was giving, which was full tuition and boarding, was about 13 boys in the choir. And he bought a bus specifically for that. The bus will bring them from school on Tuesday and Thursdays for choir practice. He had a teacher with them so that they could do some homework while they were waiting for choir practice to start. And on Sundays, the bus will bring the children back to choir to come and sing. On special occasions, they made special arrangements as well. And if you calculate 13 boys at about 2.5 million per boy, then gives you an idea of what he was prepared to put down. Another family, the Alakidias, instituted a huge scholarship fund that would fund the education of those choir boys who needed it from primary school to university level. The criteria was you have to be a member of the choir. So at the point those scholarships came in, then there was a glut of those who wanted to join the choir, the treble line. And that is the beauty of having just the treble line. I mean, just boys in the choir, if it's an all-male choir. All you'd have to do is just renew the treble line. You sustain the choir indefinitely. Once you just invest in the treble line, those young boys become the alto tenor basses later, and they've grown into the tradition of the choir. So that is just the beauty of having an all-male choir. But then, if you had, say for instance, this choir, if you had a scholarship that would help, because that is what Nigeria is now. If you had a scholarship, first of all, you'd be able to recruit. And then you'll be spoiled for choice. You can decide, no, I don't want this one. This one, his voice is not good enough. Then you recruit at age 7. So they serve till maybe 13 when their voices break. So that's about 6 years. And their school fees are paid. That's what happens in the UK. I did have the opportunity of 3 boys going to London. We sponsored 3 boys going to St. Paul's Cathedral School. And they came back. I mean, before they came back, when I went over to see them there, and I asked them what was their experience. They said in Nigeria, we are joking, we don't know what we are doing. So if that can be said of the cathedral choir in Lagos, then you can imagine what it would be like. They said we are joking. Because yes, the Cathedral of St. Paul had a school, and it was for boys. It was a boarding school. But in that school, they had 25 boys, I think about 25 boys, who were music scholars. Which meant that, yes, they attend the school, they do everything, but they are dedicated to singing. So because of that singing, their school fees were paid. And when they wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is musical, like voice training, all that. And each of them must learn 3 instruments, one of which must be the piano. They sing even songs at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they sing on Sunday and all that. Choir practice doesn't take them long because they all read music. So they can assemble an hour before choir practice, have the choir practice, and come and perform. You think they have been practicing for a year. Now, what happens, of course, is that the same with Westminster Abbey, they have a school, and the boys who sing in the choirs sing in the school fees are paid. But what happens is that later on, they come back and sing alto, tenor, bass. They've had that tradition in the choir. But even in singing those things, they still have to audition to be able to get it. Let me leave there. I don't know how long the interview is, but there are many things.
Interesting to know that you still go back to cathedral choir as a rope with them.
No, I don't rope with them.
Or to sing with them.
If, for instance, I'm there for an occasion, and I feel that I want to join them to sing, singing. It can be the non-limited just before a body is wheeled out of the church. I always normally go there, if at all. The majority of times I've been would be for funeral service. So if, for instance, they are singing Worthy is the Lamb or Hallelujah Cross or whatever, I can ask them, can I have a copy of music? Can I join? And they say, yeah. And I just go can side and I stay at the back and I join them. There's no problem.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.